I never believed in God. As a child, I thought I was supposed to. My mother drilled it into me every Sunday. We'd sit in the front pew of the church where sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows. The angels and saints depicted in those windows looked down with blank, otherworldly eyes. They weren't comforting. They were cold, detached, and distant. "Be still," my mother would whisper, squeezing my hand tightly. "God is watching." I wondered why he would bother. The God they preached about in that church didn't seem interested in fixing the evil under his roof. By the time I turned 12, I had learned enough about the darker undercurrents of that place to doubt everything I was taught. I heard the whispers, rumors about the choir director having an affair, about stolen money from the donation fund. I even saw a deacon screaming at another man in the middle of service, their argument escalating until fists flew in front of the altar. No one intervened. They only turned away, muttering prayers to a God that didn't seem to care. But it wasn't the scandals that shattered my faith. It was the laughter. One Sunday after service, I overheard the pastor, a man revered by the congregation, speaking to one of the elders in a hushed voice. They were laughing about how easy it was to manipulate people with sermons. "People believe what they want to believe," the pastor said, chuckling under his breath. "As long as you give them hope, they'll follow you anywhere." Those words stayed with me. I didn't say anything to my mother, but something inside me broke that day. The church wasn't a sanctuary. It was a mask, a thin veil covering the same corruption and greed that existed everywhere else. Yet, despite all of that, I kept coming back. I didn't know why. Maybe I was searching for something I didn't understand, some proof that not everything was a lie. Over the years, I drifted further from faith, but something always pulled me back to it. I took a job working for Father Murphy, a man who had dedicated his life to the church. He wasn't like the others. There was a quiet strength to him, a conviction that couldn't be faked. I didn't believe in what he preached, but I respected him. He didn't pressure me to have faith, and in return, I helped him with the practical tasks of church life, setting up services, organizing charity events, and keeping the building in order. It was a peaceful routine, until the day everything changed. It started on an unremarkable morning. The air inside the church was cool, the faint scent of incense lingering in the rafters. I was dusting the altar when I heard Father Murphy call my name. His voice echoed softly through the empty sanctuary. "Caleb, come to my office." I set the duster aside and made my way to the back of the church. Murphy's office was a cluttered space filled with religious texts, old relics, and more paperwork than anyone could keep track of. He looked up from his desk as I entered, his expression unusually grave. "Close the door," he said. I did as he asked and sat down across from him. He slid a folded letter across the desk. "We've received a request," he explained, his voice measured, "one that requires immediate attention." I unfolded the letter and skimmed its contents. My eyes widened at the name near the top of the page. "Diddy?" I asked incredulously. "As in Sean Diddy Combs?" Murphy nodded. "His family contacted us. They believe he's under some kind of spiritual attack." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. "Spiritual attack? You mean possession?" "They didn't use that term," Murphy clarified. "But the symptoms they described align with it. He's deteriorating rapidly, refusing to eat, talking in strange languages, experiencing violent outbursts. The doctors have found no medical explanation." I frowned, shaking my head. "Are you serious? You think he's possessed by a demon?" "I'm not jumping to conclusions," Murphy replied. "But I've seen enough in my time to know that these things aren't always easy to explain. His family is desperate, and they've asked for our help." I crossed my arms, skepticism washing over me. This sounds like something out of a movie. Maybe he's just having a breakdown. With everything going on in his life, who wouldn't? Murphy sighed. leaning forward. You're not wrong. He's under a lot of pressure. Legal troubles, scandals, the weight of his entire career. But if there's even a chance that something darker is at work, we have a duty to investigate. I hesitated. I didn't believe in demons or divine intervention. But there was a part of me, a small, nagging part, that was curious. I wanted to see for myself. When do we leave? I asked. Murphy gave a faint smile. Tomorrow morning. The next day we arrived at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. The facility loomed like a fortress of concrete and steel, its exterior cold and foreboding. Razor wire coiled along the top of the perimeter fence, glinting in the harsh daylight. Inside, the air was thick and oppressive. The sound of distant clanging echoed through the sterile hallways as guards escorted us deeper into the building. We passed rows of cells where inmates stared at us through metal bars with hollow eyes. The Metropolitan Detention Center was notorious for its conditions. Overcrowded, underfunded, and plagued by violence, it was a far cry from the life of luxury Diddy had once known. According to the reports Murphy had received, Diddy was not handling the transition well. He had been placed on suicide watch shortly after his arrival, isolated from the general population for his own safety. The guard leading us stopped in front of a reinforced door. "He's in here," he said, unlocking it with a series of sharp clicks. The door swung open, revealing a small holding area. Diddy sat on a cot in the corner, his head bowed. He was a shadow of the man I remembered from magazine covers and music videos. His skin was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and lifeless. He muttered quietly under his breath, the words too faint and garbled to understand. "Sean," Murphy called out gently. There was no response. The muttering continued, as if we weren't there. "He's been like this for days," the guard said quietly. "Doesn't eat, doesn't drink, just talks to himself. Last night he started screaming about people trying to poison him. We had to sedate him." Murphy approached slowly, holding a small crucifix in his hand. He began to recite a prayer in Latin, his voice low and steady. I watched intently, half expecting some dramatic reaction, but nothing happened. Diddy continued rocking back and forth, his eyes unfocused. "Has he said anything coherent?" Murphy asked the guard. The guard hesitated. "There was one time he called his son and started rambling about pizza boxes hiding messages. We have the recording, but it doesn't make any sense." Murphy nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need more time with him. This isn't going to be a quick process." The first session left me rattled. I couldn't shake the image of Diddy, emaciated, muttering incomprehensibly, his eyes dull and lifeless. He wasn't just stressed or broken. There was something deeper at work, something gnawing at him from the inside out. Murphy was quiet as we left the facility that day. I could tell he was processing what we'd seen, weighing whether it was truly spiritual in nature or if the man's mental state had simply deteriorated under pressure. When we returned the following day, Diddy's condition had worsened. He hadn't eaten in over 48 hours, leaving his food trays untouched. His physical decline was evident. His skin looked almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lighting, and the hollows beneath his eyes had deepened. He rocked on the edge of his cot, whispering what sounded like Latin, or maybe something older. Murphy recited a series of prayers again, but Diddy barely responded. His lips moved constantly, forming words I couldn't understand. I noticed the guard standing by the door shifting nervously, his gaze darting around the room like he expected something to jump out at him. "He talks all night," the guard muttered under his breath. "We can hear it through the walls. Sometimes it sounds like he's talking to someone, answering questions no one's asking." The guard's words sent a chill down my spine. I looked around the room, suddenly aware of how cold it had become. My breath came out in faint puffs of mist, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees without warning. Father Murphy and I stood tense in the room as Diddy's behavior escalated into something far beyond human. He jerked erratically, his eyes rolling back in his head. His mouth moved, as if whispering secrets to someone I couldn't see. Suddenly he froze, tilting his head as if listening to an unseen voice. Then his body convulsed violently, arching upward like a marionette controlled by a sadistic puppeteer. He floated a few inches off the ground, limbs rigid and quivering. The shadows around the room began to writhe like snakes, their edges sharp and twisting. "Sean, I command you to let us help you," Father Murphy shouted, his voice breaking through the tense silence. Diddy's mouth opened slowly, wider than it should have been, revealing an inky black void. His voice, when it came, was a terrifying chorus, layered, guttural, and cold. "Help me. You came here to challenge me," the voice snarled. It wasn't Diddy anymore. This thing was something far older, far darker. "Who are you?" Murphy demanded, raising his crucifix. "In the name of Christ, reveal yourself," Diddy laughed, or rather the entity inside him laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that reverberated off the walls. The temperature in the room plummeted, and a frost began to creep across the floor. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I am the king," the demon growled. "The king in every man, every ambition, every lust." His eyes snapped open, and they were pure darkness, bottomless and consuming. "I rule in your hearts without you even knowing it. I am what you chase in your dreams and what keeps you awake at night. I am the whisper of hunger that drives you to destroy yourselves in the name of power and pleasure." Murphy continued his prayer, voice trembling but unwavering. The shadows hissed, recoiling slightly at the words of exorcism. "I am eternal," the demon declared. "You will never name me, for I am in all names. I am the reason men kneel before the empty promises of fame and fortune. They call me without calling. They serve without knowing. I am the hand on every stage, the presence behind every closed door." I felt a wave of nausea roll through me as the weight of his words bore down on my chest like a crushing vice. I stumbled backward, my knees nearly giving out beneath me. The demon turned its attention to me, his dark gaze piercing straight through my soul. "You doubt yourself, don't you?" he sneered. "All your life, you've searched for something real. You think you found your answer in skepticism, in rejecting your faith. But look at you now, shaking like a child in the presence of your king." "No," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible. "Your world belongs to me," the demon continued. "Through music, through fame, through every desire you chase, the artists you idolize, they sing in my name. They lust for the riches I offer. They corrupt the world with my gospel." Murphy's voice grew louder, his prayers taking on a rhythmic urgency. The demon hissed in fury, its twisted body jerking, as if struck by invisible blows. I watched in horror as the shadows retreated, shriveling into the corners of the room. The walls groaned under the pressure of the spiritual battle unfolding before us. I couldn't look away. Every moment of disbelief I had clung to over the years was shattered. This thing, this evil, was real. And if that was true, then so was God. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, washing away every doubt and question that had weighed me down for years. My legs buckled, and I sank to the floor. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I clasped my hands together in prayer. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The words stumbled from my lips, shaky and uncertain. But as I spoke, a warmth began to bloom inside me. It was subtle at first, like a faint glow in the pit of my stomach. I kept praying, letting the words guide me out of the darkness that threatened to consume me. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." The fear that had paralyzed me melted away, replaced by something stronger. I felt as though a protective barrier had been erected around me, pushing back the cold, malevolent presence that hung in the air. Murphy gave me a nod of approval, his voice rising in strength as he continued the exorcism. We were no longer fighting this thing alone. Together we spoke words of defiance against the darkness. "Deliver us from evil, I whispered, my voice steady now. The crucifix in Murphy's hand began to glow faintly, emitting a soft golden light. The shadows recoiled further, shrinking as if burned by its presence. No, the demon howled, its voice reverberating like a shockwave. You cannot defeat me. I am eternal. Murphy sprinkled holy water over Diddy's body. The demon screamed again, writhing in agony, as if caught in a fire that only it could feel. The oppressive force in the room grew weaker. I watched as Diddy's body twisted one last time before going limp. The light returned to normal, the shadows retreating entirely. The silence that followed was deafening. The room was eerily silent after the demon's final scream faded into nothingness. All I could hear was my own breathing, ragged and shallow. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at Diddy's lifeless body sprawled on the floor. For a moment, no one moved. The guard by the door whispered a curse under his breath, breaking the oppressive stillness. I crawled forward, hesitating as I reached for Diddy's arm. Is he dead? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Murphy knelt beside me and gently pressed 2 fingers to Diddy's neck, checking for a pulse. A few agonizing seconds passed before he shook his head. Number. He's alive, Murphy said softly, but weak. He needs medical attention. As if on cue, Diddy stirred, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. His eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, they weren't clouded by madness or malice. He looked human. Where am I? He rasped, his voice hoarse and cracked. You're safe now, Murphy assured him. We're here to help you. Diddy blinked slowly, his gaze unfocused. He tried to sit up, but immediately collapsed back onto the floor, his body trembling from exhaustion. I'm hungry, he whispered weakly. The guard signaled for backup, and within minutes, a team of medical staff arrived with a stretcher. They lifted Diddy onto it with care, strapping him down as a precaution. His breathing was shallow, but he seemed more lucid than he had been in days. Once Diddy was stabilized in the prison infirmary, his daughters were called in. They arrived within an hour, their faces tense with fear and hope. I watched as they entered the room cautiously, their eyes widening when they saw their father awake and responsive. Dad? One of them asked hesitantly. Diddy's head turned slowly toward the sound of his daughter's voice. His lips twitched into a faint smile. Hey, I'm here, he murmured, his voice still weak but recognizable. The 2 girls rushed to his side, tears streaming down their faces as they embraced him. For the first time since we had arrived at the prison, I saw a glimmer of warmth and relief. The tension that had weighed down the room lifted, if only for a moment. Thank you, one of the daughters said, turning to Father Murphy and me. His eyes glistened with gratitude. Thank you for saving him. Murphy gave a humble nod. It wasn't just us. He still has a long road ahead, but he's strong. He'll recover. I stood silently by the door, observing the reunion. It should have felt like closure, a happy ending to a harrowing ordeal. But something gnawed at the edges of my mind, a nagging sense that this wasn't truly over. As we prepared to leave, I glanced back at Diddy one last time. He was sitting up in bed now, laughing softly as he spoke to his sons. The sight was almost normal, almost comforting. But then his gaze shifted, and he looked directly at me. For a brief second, I saw it. His eyes darkened, the same pitch-black void I had seen during the possession. His smile twisted ever so slightly, taking on a sinister edge. It was gone in an instant, so fast I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Almost. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Murphy noticed my hesitation and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Yeah, I lied, forcing a nod. I'm fine, but I wasn't. Deep down, I knew the truth. Asmodeus wasn't gone. Not completely. Later that night, back at the church, I finally broke down. The weight of everything I had witnessed, the supernatural horrors, the revelation of my own faith, crashed over me like a tidal wave. I found Murphy sitting in his office, quietly reading scripture by the dim light of a desk lamp. "Father," I began, my voice trembling. Murphy looked up, immediately sensing the turmoil in my expression. He set the Bible aside and gestured for me to sit. "I don't know how to move forward," I confessed as I sank into the chair across from him. I thought I knew what the world was. I thought everything I saw in that church growing up proved that faith was just a lie. But now I don't know what to believe. Tears welled in my eyes as I spoke. "I believe now," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I believe in God, but I don't know what to do with that. How do I move forward after everything I've seen?" Murphy leaned forward, his expression kind but serious. "You've already taken the first step," he said. "Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about walking the path, even when the road is uncertain. You never needed anyone else to guide you. You only needed to trust yourself and him." His words hit something deep within me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Not complete, but enough to hold on to. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faith now, and I would be ready when the time came to face him again. Until then, I wait to see Diddy's demon again.